the silent company powering the future of medicine. When we think about pharmaceutical companies, we usually picture famous brands manufacturing medicines that end up on pharmacy shelves. We imagine companies competing to sell tablets, vaccines, or life-saving drugs directly to patients. But what if I told you that some of the world's most valuable pharmaceutical businesses never sell a single medicine under their own name? In fact, there are companies working quietly behind the scenes whose scientific expertise helps create medicines used by millions of people across the globe. Most patients will never hear their names, yet without them, many modern medicines might never reach the market. One such company is Anthem Biosciences. To understand why Anthem has attracted so much attention, we first need to understand how the pharmaceutical industry itself has changed over the last 2 decades. For many years, large pharmaceutical companies followed a simple model. They discovered new drugs, developed them, tested them in clinical trials, manufactured them in their own factories, and finally sold them under their own brands. They controlled every step of the journey. But medicine has become far more complicated. Developing a single new drug today is one of the most difficult and expensive scientific challenges in the world. It can easily take more than 10 years of research before a medicine reaches patients. During this journey, companies spend billions of dollars. And even then, most drug candidates fail before commercialization. Think about that for a moment. Imagine spending over a decade building a product, investing enormous amounts of money, hiring hundreds of scientists, and still having no guarantee that the product will ever generate a single rupee of revenue. That is the reality of modern drug development. As medicines became increasingly complex, pharmaceutical companies realized something important. Trying to do everything themselves was no longer the smartest strategy. Let's use a simple analogy. Suppose you want to build your dream house. Would you first buy a cement factory? Would you open your own steel plant? Would you manufacture bricks and electrical wires yourself? Of course not. Instead, you hire specialists who already possess the expertise, equipment, and experience needed to complete each task efficiently. The pharmaceutical industry eventually reached exactly the same conclusion. Rather than investing billions of dollars in building every research laboratory and manufacturing facility internally, many global pharmaceutical companies began partnering with highly specialized organizations that already possessed world-class scientific capabilities. This gave birth to one of the fastest-growing industries in global healthcare, the CRDMO industry. CRDMO stands for Contract Research, Development, and Manufacturing Organization. Although the name sounds technical, the concept is surprisingly simple. Imagine making a blockbuster movie. The audience only sees the actors on screen. But behind every successful film stand hundreds of professionals. Writers, directors, editors, sound engineers, visual effects artists, lighting technicians, costume designers, and countless other specialists. Without them, the movie simply cannot exist. The pharmaceutical industry works in much the same way. Drug companies may own the final medicine, but behind the scenes, specialized organizations help transform scientific discoveries into products that are safe, effective, and ready for patients around the world. These organizations perform scientific research, optimize manufacturing processes, conduct development work, scale production, and manufacture medicines while meeting some of the strictest quality standards anywhere in the world. That is precisely where Anthem Biosciences operates. Unlike traditional pharmaceutical companies, Anthem doesn't focus on building a consumer brand. You won't find television advertisements asking patients to buy Anthem medicines. Instead, Anthem works directly with biotechnology companies and global pharmaceutical innovators. Its customers are some of the world's leading healthcare companies, not retail consumers. When a biotech company discovers a promising new molecule, it often lacks the infrastructure needed to convert that scientific discovery into a commercially manufactured medicine. Building that capability independently would require years of investment, specialized scientists, regulatory approvals, sophisticated laboratories, and advanced manufacturing facilities. Rather than reinventing the wheel, many companies simply partner with experts like Anthem. From the earliest stages of scientific discovery through process development, clinical manufacturing, and finally commercial-scale production, Anthem helps customers navigate the entire journey. In many cases, the medicine eventually reaches hospitals carrying another company's brand name. Patients may never know Anthem played a role. But behind every successful launch lies years of scientific collaboration, precision engineering, regulatory excellence, and manufacturing expertise. This is one of the most fascinating characteristics of the CRDMO business. Success isn't driven by television marketing. It isn't driven by celebrity endorsements. It isn't even driven by selling the highest number of tablets. Instead, success is built on something far more valuable: scientific knowledge, technical excellence, regulatory credibility, operational consistency, and perhaps most importantly, trust. Global pharmaceutical companies entrust their intellectual property, confidential research, and future commercial products to partners only after years of evaluating their capabilities. Trust like this cannot be purchased overnight. It is earned through consistent execution over many years. This shift in the pharmaceutical industry has also created an enormous opportunity for India. For decades, India earned the title of the pharmacy of the world by manufacturing affordable generic medicines for countries across the globe. That reputation built an extraordinary manufacturing ecosystem supported by skilled scientists, experienced engineers, regulatory expertise, and globally approved production facilities. But today, India is moving far beyond simply producing generic drugs. In pharmaceuticals, changing partners often means repeating regulatory judgment, technique, years of learning. Drug development works exactly the same way. Tiny changes in temperature, pressure, purification, reaction timing, or manufacturing conditions can completely change the final outcome. Producing medicines that consistently meet global quality standards requires expertise that cannot be copied overnight. Every project Anthem completes adds something valuable to its organization: new scientific knowledge, better manufacturing techniques, more regulatory experience, stronger customer confidence, lessons learned from solving complex problems. Unlike machinery, this knowledge compounds year after year. It becomes an invisible asset that competitors find extremely difficult to replicate. This creates another powerful competitive moat: experience. The more complex projects Anthem completes, the smarter the organization becomes. The smarter it becomes, the more sophisticated projects it can win. And the more sophisticated projects it wins, the stronger its reputation becomes. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Reputation attracts customers. Customers bring challenging projects. Those projects improve scientific capability. Improved capability strengthens reputation even further. This cycle is one of the reasons why successful CRDMOs become increasingly valuable over time. Another important difference separates Anthem from traditional pharmaceutical companies. Many pharmaceutical businesses depend heavily on a handful of blockbuster drugs. If one major medicine loses patent protection or faces competition, earnings can decline sharply. Anthem operates differently. Instead of depending on one product, it works across numerous customer programs simultaneously. Some research projects inevitably fail. That's perfectly normal. Drug development has always involved uncertainty. But while some molecules fail, others continue advancing toward commercialization. This diversified portfolio reduces dependence on any single product or customer. It also creates multiple opportunities for long-term growth. Of course, none of this guarantees success. The CRDMO industry is highly competitive. Customers demand scientific excellence. Quality standards become stricter every year. Global competitors continue investing billions of dollars into research and manufacturing. Winning contracts requires flawless execution. Keeping those contracts requires even greater consistency. In many industries, companies compete mainly on price. In the CRDMO business, companies compete on trust. One quality failure can damage relationships built over many years. That is why reputation becomes one of the industry's most valuable assets. And this brings us to perhaps the most important factor of all. No matter how attractive the industry, no matter how powerful the business model, no matter how large the opportunity, everything ultimately depends on the people making the decisions. Because factories don't allocate capital. Laboratories don't decide expansion plans. Machines don't build customer relationships. Management does. The quality of leadership determines whether a good business becomes a truly exceptional one. So before deciding whether Anthem Biosciences deserves long-term investor attention, we need to understand the people steering this company. Because in investing, businesses may create opportunities. But management decides whether those opportunities become lasting shareholder wealth. And that's exactly where our story goes next. Anthem Biosciences, Documentary Voiceover, Part 3, The Management, the Moat, and the Making of a Long-Term Compounder. So far, we've discovered that Anthem Biosciences isn't just another pharmaceutical company. It's a scientific partner that helps some of the world's biggest drug innovators transform laboratory discoveries into medicines that reach patients across the globe. Its integrated CRDMO model creates long-term customer relationships, generates repeat business, and builds powerful switching costs. But here's something every experienced investor eventually learns. A great business model alone is never enough. History is full of companies that operated in fantastic industries but still failed to create shareholder wealth. Why? Because industries don't make decisions. Management does. And in businesses like Anthem Biosciences, where projects take years to mature and investments may not generate returns for a decade, leadership becomes even more important. Imagine you're planting a mango orchard. You don't plant the seed today and expect fruit next month. You prepare the land, invest in irrigation, take care of the trees, protect them from disease, and then you wait. Only after years of patient nurturing do the trees begin producing fruit. Building a CRDMO business follows exactly the same principle. New research facilities, advanced laboratories, large-scale manufacturing plants, specialized fermentation capabilities, highly skilled scientists. None of these investments generate profits overnight. Management must think years ahead. They must invest today for opportunities that may only appear 5 or even 10 years later. This is why long-term thinking is one of the biggest competitive advantages in the pharmaceutical industry. Short-term managers chase quarterly profits. Great managers build businesses that continue creating value for decades. That brings us to one of the most overlooked qualities investors should evaluate: capital allocation. Capital allocation simply means one thing. Every rupee the company earns must be put to work somewhere. Should management build another manufacturing facility, invest in research capabilities, hire more scientists, reduce debt, acquire new technology, expand fermentation capacity, or return money to shareholders? These decisions may sound ordinary. But over long periods, they determine whether shareholders become wealthy. Think about two farmers who each earn the same income. One spends everything immediately. The other reinvests wisely every season into better irrigation, better seeds, and better farming equipment. 10 years later, who owns the more valuable farm? Exactly. Businesses work in the same way. The companies that reinvest intelligently usually outperform those chasing short-term profits. From its journey so far, Anthem appears to have followed a disciplined path. Instead of expanding recklessly, the company has steadily strengthened its capabilities across research, development, manufacturing, and specialty ingredients. Notice the strategy here. Anthem isn't simply adding more factories. It's building a platform. Every new capability makes the company more valuable to existing customers. Suppose a pharmaceutical company initially approaches Anthem only for research. If Anthem can later support development, then clinical manufacturing, then commercial production, that single customer may continue working with Anthem for many years. Instead of repeatedly searching for new clients, the company steadily increases the value of relationships it already has. That's a far more efficient way to grow. This integrated approach creates something every business wants but very few achieve: customer stickiness. The longer customers stay, the stronger relationships become. The stronger relationships become, the more difficult it becomes for competitors to replace you. But expanding intelligently is only one part of the story. Expansion itself can be dangerous. Imagine opening 10 restaurants across the country without knowing whether customers will actually visit them. Your costs rise immediately. Revenue may not. Empty restaurants destroy capital. The same principle applies to pharmaceutical manufacturing. Building a new facility doesn't automatically create wealth. It simply creates capacity. Real value appears only when that capacity attracts customers and operates efficiently. Disciplined management understands this difference. They don't expand because they can. They expand because demand justifies it. Another characteristic separates world-class CRDMOs from average manufacturers: reputation. In most industries, losing one customer is unfortunate. In pharmaceuticals, losing trust can be devastating. Global pharmaceutical companies don't merely purchase manufacturing services. They entrust partners with years of confidential research, highly valuable intellectual property, sensitive manufacturing processes, and products that could eventually generate billions of dollars in sales. That level of trust isn't built through advertising. It's earned project after project, year after year, regulatory inspection after regulatory inspection. Every successful delivery strengthens credibility. Every quality audit reinforces confidence. Every satisfied customer increases the likelihood of future business. Over time, reputation itself becomes a competitive moat, one that competitors cannot simply buy. But perhaps Anthem possesses another advantage that investors often underestimate: knowledge accumulation. Every scientific problem solved, every manufacturing challenge overcome, every regulatory approval obtained adds to the organization's collective experience. Think about an experienced surgeon. After performing thousands of operations, that surgeon develops instincts impossible to learn from textbooks alone. Scientists develop expertise the same way. Each completed project teaches lessons that improve future projects. Over years, these small improvements compound into enormous organizational knowledge. This knowledge isn't recorded only in documents. It lives inside teams, processes, research methods, quality systems, and company culture. That accumulated expertise becomes one of the most durable competitive advantages any scientific organization can build. It also explains why customers often remain loyal for years. Because they aren't just paying for laboratory space. They're paying for experience, for judgment, for problem-solving ability, for confidence that complex molecules can be developed efficiently and manufactured consistently. Another important aspect investors should appreciate is diversification. Traditional pharmaceutical companies often depend on a handful of blockbuster medicines. If one product disappoints, or loses patent protection, or faces unexpected competition, profits can fall dramatically. Anthem's model is fundamentally different. The company participates in numerous customer programs simultaneously. Some projects inevitably fail. Drug discovery has always involved uncertainty. But that's perfectly normal. Success doesn't require every molecule to succeed. It requires enough successful projects progressing from research to commercial manufacturing over time. That diversified pipeline reduces dependence on any single customer or product, and it creates multiple opportunities for future growth. However, none of this eliminates risk. Scientific innovation never stands still. Competitors continue investing heavily. Technology evolves rapidly. Global regulations become stricter every year. Customers constantly demand faster execution, better quality, and more advanced capabilities. Standing still simply isn't an option. Leadership must continuously improve the business. Not because something is broken, but because competitors are trying to become better every single day. That's what makes management quality so important. Great leaders don't simply react to change. They prepare for it long before others recognize it. The best management teams continue investing even during difficult periods. They avoid chasing short-term earnings at the expense of long-term competitiveness. And they make decisions based on where the industry will be tomorrow, not where it is today. So after understanding Anthem's business model, customer relationships, scientific expertise, and management philosophy, one question naturally follows. Do these trends actually translate into financial performance? Because ultimately, every great business story must eventually appear in the numbers. Revenue, profitability, cash generation, returns on capital, balance sheet strength. These financial indicators reveal whether management strategy is genuinely creating shareholder value or simply telling a compelling story. And that's exactly where we're headed next. Because numbers don't tell the entire story, but they never lie for very long. Reading the numbers like an investor. By now, we've understood the business. We've seen why the CRDMO industry is growing, how Anthem has positioned itself as a trusted scientific partner, and why management quality plays such a critical role in building long-term value. But every business story eventually reaches a point where emotions have to step aside. Because in investing, there is one universal rule. A wonderful story must eventually be supported by wonderful numbers. This is where many investors make a mistake. They open the annual report, look at revenue, look at profit, compare it with last year, and immediately conclude whether the company is doing well. Professional investors don't read financial statements that way. They read them like detectives. Every number raises another question. Every ratio reveals another clue. And together, those clues tell the real story hidden behind the business. Imagine you're considering buying a successful restaurant. The owner proudly tells you that annual sales have doubled over the last 5 years. At first glance, that sounds fantastic. But before writing the check, wouldn't you ask a few more questions? How much profit is actually left after paying expenses? Are customers paying on time? Is the restaurant heavily dependent on loans? Can it survive a difficult year? Are profits improving because the business is becoming stronger, or simply because it's getting bigger? These are exactly the same questions experienced investors ask every listed company. Because revenue is only the beginning of the story. Let's start there. Revenue tells us how much business a company is doing. But revenue alone never creates wealth. Imagine two taxi drivers. Both earn 10 lakh rupees in a year. On paper, both appear equally successful. But one spends 9 lakh rupees on fuel, repairs, commissions, and maintenance. The other spends only 6 lakh rupees because he operates more efficiently. Both generated identical revenue. But one ends the year with far more money in his pocket. Businesses work exactly the same way. Revenue shows how much money comes in. Profit shows how much actually stays with the business. For Anthem Biosciences, what's encouraging isn't simply that the business has grown. What's more important is that the company has maintained healthy profitability while expanding. That tells investors something extremely valuable. Customers aren't choosing Anthem because it's the cheapest option. They're choosing it because they trust its scientific expertise, regulatory standards, and ability to deliver consistent quality. That's called pricing power. And pricing power is one of the strongest competitive advantages any business can possess. Think about two coffee shops. One constantly offers discounts just to attract customers. The other has people waiting in line every morning despite charging premium prices. Why? Because customers trust the experience. They're paying for quality. They're paying for consistency. They're paying for confidence. The same principle applies to Anthem. Its customers aren't simply purchasing manufacturing capacity. They're buying scientific capability, reliability, regulatory confidence, and peace of mind. Those qualities allow a business to protect its margins over long periods. But profit alone doesn't tell the complete story. Imagine selling furniture worth 10 crore rupees. Every customer promises to pay after 18 months. On paper, your business looks extremely profitable. But your bank account is empty. Employees still need salaries. Electricity bills still need to be paid. Raw materials still have to be purchased. Suppliers don't accept accounting profits. They expect cash. That's why experienced investors pay enormous attention to operating cash flow. Operating cash flow answers one simple but powerful question. Is the company actually collecting the money it claims to have earned? Strong cash generation is often a sign of a healthy business. It allows management to invest in new research facilities, expand manufacturing capacity, upgrade technology, and continue strengthening the business without relying excessively on borrowed money. Cash gives management freedom, and financial flexibility is an advantage that's often invisible during good times, but becomes incredibly valuable when conditions become difficult. The next area investors examine is the balance sheet. Think of it as the company's medical report. When a doctor examines a patient, body weight alone isn't enough. Blood pressure, heart health, sugar levels, organ function, everything matters. Similarly, investors don't judge a company only by profit. They also ask, how much debt does it have? Can it comfortably repay its obligations? Does it have enough financial strength to continue investing during industry slowdowns? A strong balance sheet acts like a safety cushion. It allows companies to continue growing even when the business environment becomes uncertain. Businesses burdened with excessive debt often lose flexibility. Instead of investing in future opportunities, they spend years servicing loans. Companies with healthy balance sheets have far more choices. They can expand faster, invest aggressively when opportunities appear, and survive unexpected challenges without damaging shareholder value. Another metric professional investors quietly admire is return on capital. It may sound technical, but the idea is surprisingly simple. Imagine two farmers. Each plants 100 mango trees. After a few years, one farmer harvests 200 baskets of mangoes. The other harvests 500 baskets from the same number of trees. Who used his resources more efficiently? Obviously, the second farmer. Businesses work exactly the same way. Return on capital measures how efficiently management converts every rupee invested into profits. High returns often indicate something deeper. They suggest management isn't merely growing. They're growing intelligently. They're creating more value from the same resources. That is one characteristic often shared by exceptional long-term compounders. Then comes expansion. Whenever companies announce new factories or capacity additions, headlines often celebrate the news. But experienced investors remain cautious. Because building another factory doesn't automatically create shareholder wealth. It only creates the possibility of future growth. Real wealth is created only when that new capacity attracts customers, operates efficiently, maintains profitability, and generates attractive returns over many years. In Anthem's case, future success will depend not simply on adding laboratories or manufacturing plants. It will depend on whether global pharmaceutical companies continue trusting Anthem with increasingly sophisticated projects, whether more research programs progress toward commercial manufacturing, whether capacity utilization steadily improves, and whether management continues allocating capital with discipline. When we step back and connect all these pieces, a much clearer picture begins to emerge. Growing revenue, healthy operating margins, strong cash generation, prudent financial management, disciplined capital allocation, continuous investment in scientific capability. These aren't isolated financial statistics. Together, They describe a business steadily strengthening its competitive position. But here's where investing becomes truly interesting. Sometimes, the biggest risk isn't buying a weak business. It's paying too much for an exceptional one. Because no matter how wonderful a company may be, if investors already expect perfection, even small disappointments can hurt returns. And that leads us to one of the most misunderstood concepts in investing: the difference between buying a great business and making a great investment. Because, surprisingly, those are not always the same thing. A great business doesn't always mean a great investment. By this point, one thing has become very clear. Anthem Biosciences appears to possess many of the qualities investors search for in a long-term business. It operates in a rapidly expanding industry. It has built strong scientific capabilities. Its customers are global pharmaceutical companies rather than individual consumers. Its business model encourages long-term partnerships. Its management appears focused on disciplined growth. And its financial profile reflects a company that has steadily strengthened its competitive position. So naturally, one question comes to mind. If the business is this good, should investors simply buy the stock? Surprisingly, the answer isn't always yes. Because one of the most important lessons in investing is this: a great business and a great investment are not always the same thing. That might sound strange at first. After all, if the company is excellent, shouldn't the stock automatically be an excellent investment? Not necessarily. Let's understand why. Imagine two identical apartments in the same building. Both have the same size, the same location, the same amenities, the same rental income. The only difference is the price. One apartment is available for 2 crore rupees. The other is priced at 6 crore rupees. Which one is the better investment? Most people immediately understand the answer. It depends on the price you pay. The apartment didn't change. Only the expectations did. The stock market works exactly the same way. Buying shares isn't simply buying a company. You're buying the future earnings that company is expected to generate. And sometimes, those future expectations become so optimistic that even an outstanding business struggles to justify its valuation. This is where the concept of valuation becomes important. Valuation is simply the market's way of answering one question: how much is this business worth today based on what investors believe it can become tomorrow? Notice something interesting. The market rarely rewards companies for what they achieved yesterday. Yesterday is already known. Yesterday is already reflected in the share price. The market continuously tries to predict tomorrow. Imagine two students. One has consistently scored 95 marks every year. Another has improved from 60 to 80. Who receives more attention? Often, it's the second student. Not because he's better today, but because people become excited about improvement. The stock market behaves in exactly the same way. It rewards future potential far more than past performance. That's why share prices often move long before earnings actually improve. The market constantly asks, will this company grow faster? Will profits increase? Will margins improve? Will it win more customers? Will management execute better than expected? The answers to these questions shape valuation. This brings us to one of Warren Buffett's most famous observations. Price is what you pay. Value is what you get. It's a simple sentence, but it captures one of the deepest truths in investing. Imagine buying a mango tree. If that tree produces the same number of mangoes every year, would you willingly pay 10 times more than its actual worth? Probably not. Even the best mango tree has a reasonable price. Businesses are no different. Even exceptional companies can become poor investments if investors pay far too much. So why do outstanding businesses often trade at premium valuations? The answer is surprisingly simple. Because investors trust them. Companies with strong management, healthy balance sheets, consistent profitability, long growth runways, and durable competitive advantages usually command higher prices, just as people happily pay more for a trusted brand. Investors are willing to pay more for businesses they believe can continue creating wealth for many years. But paying a premium creates another challenge. It raises expectations. Think about a superstar cricketer. Whenever he walks onto the field, fans expect a century. If he scores 70 runs, most people call it disappointing. Now imagine a young debutant scoring the same 70. Suddenly, everyone celebrates. The performance was identical. Only expectations were different. The stock market behaves exactly the same way. When a company trades at a high valuation, investors expect flawless execution. They expect continuous revenue growth, healthy profit margins, successful expansion, new customer wins, strong cash generation, excellent capital allocation, consistent earnings, quarter after quarter, year after year. The higher the valuation, the smaller the room for mistakes. Even a minor disappointment can trigger significant corrections. That's why experienced investors don't ask only, "Is this a great company?" They also ask, "How much optimism is already reflected in today's share price?" To answer that question, investors use different valuation tools. You've probably heard names like price-to-earnings ratio, PEG ratio, discounted cash flow, enterprise value to EBITDA, at first glance. Discounted cash flow, enterprise value to EBITDA. At first glance, these terms sound intimidating, but each of them simply looks at the business from a different angle. The price-to-earnings ratio asks, how much are investors willing to pay for today's earnings? The PEG ratio goes one step further. It compares valuation with expected future growth. Discounted cash flow estimates how much all future cash generated by the business may be worth today. Enterprise value looks beyond just the equity value and considers the entire business, including debt and cash. No single method gives the perfect answer. Each is simply another lens through which investors estimate value. Professional investors rarely depend on only one ratio. Instead, they combine multiple perspectives. They study industry trends, management quality, competitive positioning, financial strength, growth opportunities, and only then do they decide whether current expectations appear reasonable. So where does Anthem Biosciences fit into this picture? Buying Anthem isn't merely buying laboratories, or fermentation facilities, or manufacturing plants. Investors are effectively buying a belief. The belief that global pharmaceutical outsourcing will continue expanding. The belief that India's CRDMO industry will keep gaining market share. The belief that Anthem will continue winning new customers. The belief that existing clients will deepen their partnerships. The belief that management will continue executing successfully. And finally, the belief that today's investments will generate even greater earnings tomorrow. That's an enormous amount of expectation. Which brings us back to the central question. The question isn't, is Anthem Biosciences a good company? Based on everything we've explored so far, it certainly possesses many qualities investors admire. The real question is something much more important. Can Anthem continue performing well enough to exceed the expectations already reflected in its valuation? Because businesses generate profits. But expectations determine share prices. And in the stock market, human psychology often matters just as much as financial statements. This is exactly why some outstanding businesses underperform for years, while other companies create extraordinary shareholder returns. Not because their businesses suddenly changed overnight, but because investor expectations changed. Understanding this difference separates traders from long-term investors. Traders chase price movements. Investors evaluate business quality and expectations together. And when those two align, that's often where exceptional investment opportunities begin. But before reaching any final conclusion about Anthem Biosciences, there's one more important piece of the puzzle we need to understand. The people who quietly influence stock prices long before retail investors even notice. Institutional investors. Because in most great wealth-creating stories, The business improves first. Large institutions recognize it next. And only much later does the broader market catch up. Let's see whether Anthem is following that same journey. Anthem Biosciences, Documentary Voiceover. Part 6. The Invisible Hands That Create Wealth. At this stage, we've looked at Anthem Biosciences from almost every business angle. We understand how the company operates. We've explored its business model, competitive advantages, management philosophy, financial quality, and even the importance of valuation. But there's another force in the stock market that many retail investors underestimate. A force that often determines whether a good company eventually becomes a multi-bagger. That force is institutional investors. Most people believe stock prices move because of news. A company announces a new order. The stock goes up. A quarterly result disappoints. The stock falls. While news certainly influences prices in the short term, it rarely explains the biggest wealth-creating journeys. The truth is much more interesting. Stocks don't move because of today's news. They move because of tomorrow's expectations. And the investors who shape those expectations are often large institutions. Mutual funds, pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, global investment firms, foreign institutional investors. Unlike retail investors, these institutions manage enormous pools of capital. They aren't buying a few hundred shares. Sometimes they need to buy millions. And that creates a unique challenge. Imagine trying to purchase every house in a small neighborhood. If everyone suddenly realizes you're buying aggressively, property prices immediately begin rising. The more you buy, the more expensive every remaining house becomes. Institutional investors face exactly the same problem in the stock market. They simply cannot purchase huge quantities in a single day. Doing so would push prices sharply higher. Instead, they quietly accumulate shares over weeks, sometimes months, and occasionally even years. This phase is known as institutional accumulation. It's one of the most fascinating parts of investing because it usually happens long before the broader market notices anything unusual. While retail investors are reacting to headlines, institutions are studying businesses, meeting management teams, analyzing industry trends, visiting manufacturing facilities, evaluating competitive advantages, speaking with customers, and building conviction. By the time exciting news reaches financial television, many institutional investors have already completed a significant part of their buying. This explains an important pattern seen repeatedly in the stock market. The biggest wealth creators rarely begin with explosive price movements. They begin quietly, almost invisibly. First, the business improves. Management executes consistently. Customer relationships deepen. Margins remain healthy. Scientific capabilities expand. Cash flows become stronger. Then institutions slowly begin increasing their ownership. Only much later, when earnings become impossible to ignore, the broader investing community finally discovers the company. By then, much of the early wealth creation has already happened. This is why experienced investors spend far more time studying businesses than watching daily stock prices. Because businesses usually improve long before share prices fully reflect those improvements. Institutions also think very differently from most retail investors. Many retail investors constantly ask, "What will happen to the stock next week?" Institutional investors ask something completely different. Will this business become significantly stronger over the next 5 years? Notice the difference. One question focuses on price. The other focuses on business quality. That's why institutions become interested in companies that consistently improve, not necessarily companies that are already perfect. Every quarter they ask, is management executing better than before? Are customer relationships becoming deeper? Is the company's competitive advantage widening? Are returns on capital improving? Is innovation accelerating? Are new growth opportunities emerging? These factors matter far more than temporary market volatility. That's one reason patience often becomes one of the greatest competitive advantages available to long-term investors. Markets frequently overreact to short-term events. But exceptional businesses usually create wealth slowly, quarter after quarter, year after year. One successful project doesn't transform a company. Hundreds of successful projects do. One satisfied customer doesn't build a global reputation. Years of consistent execution do. This gradual strengthening often goes unnoticed by the market, until suddenly everyone begins talking about the company. It feels like success happened overnight. In reality, the foundation was built quietly over many years. So where does Anthem Biosciences fit into this picture? The company's future won't depend on whether its share price rises next month. It will depend on whether the underlying business continues becoming stronger. Can Anthem continue expanding its scientific capabilities? Can it win more global pharmaceutical customers? Can existing clients trust it with increasingly complex molecules? Can more research projects successfully move toward commercial manufacturing? Can management continue investing wisely without sacrificing profitability? If the answers remain positive over the coming years, institutional confidence is also likely to increase. And history shows that when institutional ownership steadily rises in fundamentally improving businesses, long-term shareholder value often follows. Of course, this doesn't mean the journey will always be smooth. Every great company experiences periods of volatility. Markets become pessimistic. Economic conditions change. Global uncertainties emerge. Temporary disappointments occur. Even the world's best businesses have witnessed sharp corrections. But institutions rarely panic because of one difficult quarter. They focus on whether the long-term investment thesis remains intact. That's another lesson retail investors can learn. Instead of asking, "Why did the stock fall today?" ask, "Did the business become weaker today?" Those are two completely different questions. Sometimes the answer is yes. Many times, the answer is no. This difference separates investors from speculators. Speculators react to price. Investors evaluate business fundamentals. Looking at history, nearly every legendary wealth creator followed the same sequence. First, the business quietly improved. Then, institutions recognized the opportunity. Finally, the broader market discovered the story. Understanding this sequence doesn't guarantee investment success, but it dramatically improves the way we think. Instead of chasing companies after they become popular, we begin searching for businesses that are quietly becoming stronger every year. And that brings us to perhaps the most exciting question of this entire journey. Can Anthem Biosciences become one of India's defining CRDMO companies over the next decade? Can it eventually stand alongside the industry's global leaders? Or perhaps even challenge them? The opportunity certainly exists. But opportunity alone has never created shareholder wealth. Execution does. And that's exactly what we'll explore next. Can Anthem Biosciences become India's next CRDMO champion? After understanding Anthem Biosciences from every important angle, one question naturally stands above all others. How big can this company actually become? Can it simply remain another successful pharmaceutical company? Or does it have the potential to become one of the world's leading CRDMOs? No one can answer that question with certainty. But we can evaluate the ingredients required to build a global leader. Because in business, extraordinary success is rarely the result of luck. It usually happens when a massive opportunity meets exceptional execution. Think about India's IT industry. 3 decades ago, companies like Infosys, TCS, and Wipro were relatively small players serving global clients. Today, they are trusted technology partners for some of the largest corporations in the world. They didn't become leaders overnight. They earned trust one customer, one project, and one successful delivery at a time. The CRDMO industry follows a remarkably similar path. Every successful project builds credibility. every satisfied customer strengthens reputation. Every commercialized molecule increases scientific experience. Over time, these individual successes compound into a business that becomes increasingly difficult to compete against. This is the journey Anthem is attempting to build. But it's important to understand one thing. Anthem isn't competing only with Indian companies. Its real competition is global. When an American biotechnology company discovers a breakthrough cancer therapy, or when a European pharmaceutical company develops a promising biologic, they don't ask, which Indian company should we work with? They ask something much more important. Who is the best scientific partner in the world for this project? That means Anthem competes with established CRDMOs from the United States, Europe, China, Japan, South Korea, and other advanced pharmaceutical markets. In this industry, geography alone offers no advantage. Scientific capability does. Quality does. Regulatory excellence does. Customer trust does. Winning even a small share of this enormous global opportunity can create tremendous long-term value. Within India, however, there is one company that naturally becomes the benchmark. Syngene International. For years, Syngene has been regarded as India's gold standard in the CRDMO industry. It has built world-class laboratories, strong scientific credibility, deep relationships with multinational pharmaceutical companies, and an impressive global reputation. In many ways, Syngene has demonstrated what is possible for an Indian CRDMO. So whenever investors evaluate Anthem, comparisons with Syngene are inevitable. But comparisons should be viewed carefully. Leadership in this industry isn't decided by market excitement. It is earned over decades. Imagine a young architect entering a profession dominated by experienced masters. The newcomer may possess extraordinary talent. But every project must prove that talent. Every completed building strengthens credibility. Every satisfied client improves reputation. Eventually, if execution remains exceptional, the young architect earns recognition alongside the industry's veterans. Anthem appears to be walking that same path, not by trying to replace established leaders overnight, but by steadily strengthening its own capabilities. This brings us to another important investing lesson. Many investors compare companies primarily by revenue. Professional investors compare business quality. Revenue is important, but revenue alone rarely creates lasting competitive advantage. What truly matters is how efficiently a company converts scientific expertise into long-term profitability. Can it generate attractive returns on capital? Can it maintain healthy margins? Can it consistently reinvest for future growth? Can it deepen customer relationships? Can it build knowledge that competitors struggle to replicate? These qualities determine whether revenue eventually compounds into shareholder wealth. One area where Anthem appears particularly well-positioned is the future direction of medicine itself. Healthcare is changing rapidly. Traditional small molecule medicines will continue playing an important role. But the industry is increasingly shifting toward biologics, gene therapies, cell therapies, peptides, precision medicine, and other highly advanced treatments. These therapies are dramatically more complex than conventional pharmaceuticals. They require specialized manufacturing processes, advanced scientific capabilities, sophisticated regulatory expertise, and years of accumulated experience. In other words, as medicine becomes more complicated, scientific expertise becomes even more valuable. That structural trend directly benefits high-quality CRDMOs. Among Anthem's technical strengths, one capability deserves special attention: fermentation technology. To many investors, fermentation sounds like something associated with food. But in biotechnology, fermentation is one of the industry's most valuable scientific capabilities. Imagine microscopic organisms working like millions of tiny biological factories. Instead of manufacturing cars or electronics, they produce enzymes, proteins, complex pharmaceutical ingredients, and other high-value biological compounds. Developing this expertise is incredibly difficult. It cannot simply be purchased. It requires years of scientific learning, process optimization, trial and error, and accumulated operational knowledge. As demand for biologics continues expanding globally, companies possessing advanced fermentation capabilities may enjoy an increasingly important competitive advantage. This could become one of Anthem's strongest long-term moats. Another characteristic makes the CRDMO business particularly attractive: customer retention. Winning a pharmaceutical customer is challenging, but keeping that customer can be even more valuable. Suppose Anthem helps develop a promising molecule. The drug successfully completes clinical trials. Manufacturing processes receive regulatory approval. Commercial production begins. Would the customer suddenly replace its manufacturing partner? Highly unlikely. Changing manufacturing partners at that stage involves enormous complexity: fresh validation, regulatory approvals, technology transfer, operational risk, potential supply disruptions. Most pharmaceutical companies prefer maintaining long-term partnerships once trust has been established. That creates recurring opportunities extending many years into the future. However, every opportunity brings its own challenges. Anthem's future is far from guaranteed. The company must continue expanding manufacturing capacity without creating excess supply. It must attract and retain highly skilled scientists in an intensely competitive talent market. It must consistently satisfy demanding international regulators. It must diversify its customer base, continue investing in advanced technologies, protect its intellectual property, maintain world-class quality standards, and compete against some of the largest CRDMOs in the world. None of these challenges are impossible, but each one will test management's execution over the coming decade. This is why experienced investors rarely focus only on next quarter's earnings. Instead, they ask a much more meaningful question: what must happen over the next 5 years for this business to become significantly more valuable? For Anthem, the answer is relatively straightforward: more research molecules progressing toward commercialization, more global pharmaceutical customers, stronger relationships with existing clients, better utilization of manufacturing capacity, consistent cash generation, disciplined reinvestment, continuous scientific innovation, and steadily widening competitive advantages. If these factors continue improving together, the business itself is likely to become far stronger than it is today. And history shows that when business quality compounds, valuation often follows. Can Anthem eventually overtake Syngene? No one knows. Business is never a game of certainty. It's a game of probabilities. But based on everything we've explored, Anthem appears to possess many of the characteristics investors look for in future industry leaders: an integrated business model, strong scientific capabilities, growing global demand, advanced fermentation expertise, disciplined management, healthy financial foundations, long-term customer relationships, and structural industry tailwinds. These ingredients create potential. But potential alone has never created wealth. Only consistent execution can do that. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most important lesson of this entire story. What should investors actually take away from Anthem Biosciences? Not just as a company, but as a way of thinking about investing itself. Because sometimes, the biggest lesson isn't about the stock. It's about becoming a better investor. The final reflection: business first, stock later. After spending time understanding Anthem Biosciences from every possible angle, we finally reached the most important part of this journey. Not the financial ratios, not the valuation, not even the future growth opportunities. The biggest lesson is about how we should think as investors. Because successful investing has never been about collecting the most information. It's about asking the right questions. If you look back at everything we've discussed, a clear pattern begins to emerge. Anthem isn't trying to become the next blockbuster pharmaceutical company, selling medicines directly to patients. Instead, it is trying to become something even more valuable, a trusted scientific partner that helps global pharmaceutical companies bring life-saving medicines to market. That's a very different business. Its success isn't measured by television advertisements or pharmacy sales. It's measured by the confidence global innovators place in its scientific capabilities. Every time a pharmaceutical company chooses Anthem for a research project, every time another molecule successfully progresses from development to commercial manufacturing, every time an existing customer decides to expand its partnership, the business quietly becomes stronger. Most people never notice these milestones because they don't immediately appear on a stock chart. But over time, they become the foundation of long-term wealth creation. This is one of the biggest misconceptions in investing. Many people believe wealth begins when a stock price starts rising. In reality, wealth usually begins much earlier. It begins when the business itself starts improving, long before television channels discuss the company, long before social media becomes excited, long before the share price captures public attention. The real compounding has already begun inside the business. Scientific knowledge accumulates. Customer trust deepens. Manufacturing processes improve. Employees become more experienced. Regulatory credibility strengthens. Management allocates capital wisely. Competitive advantages gradually widen. None of these developments create instant excitement, but together, they create something extremely powerful. A business that becomes stronger year after year. And when business quality compounds, shareholder wealth often follows. That's why experienced investors spend more time studying businesses than predicting stock prices. They understand that stock prices fluctuate every day. Business quality changes much more slowly. Think about planting a tree. You don't measure its success every morning. You measure it after years. Has it grown stronger? Are the roots deeper? Are the branches healthier? Is it producing more fruit? Businesses should be evaluated exactly the same way. One quarter rarely changes the long-term story. One market correction rarely destroys a great company. What truly matters is whether the underlying business continues moving in the right direction. Of course, no investment is free from risk. Anthem's journey won't always be smooth. Competition will become more intense. Technology will continue evolving. Customers may delay projects. Global pharmaceutical spending could slow temporarily. Capacity expansions may take longer than expected to generate returns. Scientific talent will become increasingly valuable. Regulatory standards will continue becoming stricter. These challenges are real. Ignoring them would be a mistake. But understanding risk doesn't mean avoiding opportunity. It simply means recognizing that every great business must continuously earn its position. Nothing is guaranteed. The companies that survive are the ones that continue adapting, continue innovating, continue improving, and continue delivering value to customers. That is exactly what investors should watch in the years ahead. Not daily price movements, not social media excitement, not market rumors. Instead, ask questions that truly matter. Is Anthem winning more global customers? Are customer relationships becoming deeper? Are more research projects reaching commercialization? Is scientific capability continuing to improve? Is management allocating capital wisely? Is the competitive moat becoming stronger? If the answers remain positive, the business itself is likely becoming more valuable, regardless of what the stock does over the next few months. This is perhaps the greatest lesson Anthem Biosciences offers. It teaches us to think like business owners instead of stock traders. Business owners don't wake up every morning asking, "What is someone willing to pay for my business today?" They ask something much more important. Is my business stronger today than it was yesterday? That single shift in thinking changes everything. Because over the long run, stock prices tend to follow business quality. Not every week, not every quarter, But over many years, can Anthem Biosciences become one of India's great long-term compounders? No one can answer that with certainty. The future is never guaranteed. But if global outsourcing continues expanding, if India's position in pharmaceutical research keeps strengthening, if Anthem continues investing in science, innovation, manufacturing excellence, and customer relationships, if management continues executing with discipline, then the company certainly possesses many of the ingredients that define exceptional long-term businesses. Ultimately, investing isn't about predicting tomorrow's share price. It's about identifying businesses that quietly become stronger every single year. Because markets may fluctuate, economic cycles may come and go, investor sentiment will always change. But businesses built on scientific excellence, customer trust, disciplined management, and continuous innovation have the potential to create value for decades. And perhaps that's the most important takeaway from Anthem Biosciences. Don't begin by asking whether the stock will double. Begin by asking whether the business deserves to exist 10 or 20 years from now. If the answer continues becoming stronger with every passing year, the stock often tells the rest of the story by itself. Thank you for listening. If you enjoy deep, research-driven business stories explained in simple language, subscribe to the channel and join us as we uncover the companies quietly shaping the future, one business story at a time.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.